Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, I think the last time I went to the US was Chicago, where I went to the No Longer Virtual event. And in a couple of days, I'm off to No Longer Virtual in Utah. So it'd be great to get back to the US. And the only reason I mention that is if you'd like to pop by and say hello, if you do listen to the podcast in Utah, give me a heads up. Maybe we can visit Skinwalker Ranch, drink beers looking up to the skies at UFOs or something like that. But another reason I bring it up is today's guest is from Chicago. He's a great guy. I'm looking forward to getting him on the podcast today. His name is Paddy Padmanabhan, and he's from a company called Damo Consulting. He's got a great story, and I invited him on here today to talk about the top digital priorities for health systems, how to develop enterprise digital roadmaps, digital maturity in healthcare, and also learn more from his great story too. But enough from me. Buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Chicago, where Paddy is waiting to share his story. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Well, my name is Paddy Padmanabhan. I run a digital transformation advisory firm that works exclusively in the healthcare space. Our clients are mostly large hospital networks, big hospital systems. And we help them with their digital transformation strategy, technology roadmaps, that kind of work. I'm also widely published on the topic. I've written 2 books. I write frequently and I'm quoted in industry media. That's a little bit of my work and what I do. I've been running my firm now for a little over 7 years. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to finding out more about that. But before we begin, I always like to learn more about my guests and how they got where they are today. So how did you get here? What was your origin story? Can you remember what lit the spark and got you so interested in technology?
I started the company in 2012. And around that time, I had decided to move on from the corporate world and into the world of entrepreneurship. I wound up in 2 analytics startups, one after another, that went through exits. But I always wanted to do something on my own. And so in 2014, I dived into this full time. And that's really my origin story. It was a long-standing desire to pursue an entrepreneurial career. And I had spent enough time in the corporate world and had made some wonderful friends, learned a lot of things, learned the tricks of the trade, and it was time for me to go do something on my own. So that's how I ended up doing what I'm doing. How I ended up in healthcare was purely somewhat happenstance, because I had already been working in healthcare for a while, and I knew that the United States was going through a very big transformation in the healthcare sector. And as you probably know, as most of your listeners would know, healthcare in the United States is largely private. And so the hospitals, the insurance companies, they're privately owned. Parts of the healthcare system are government run, but unlike in many other OECD countries, the healthcare system here is largely private. And so there was a great need for the entire healthcare sector, the healthcare economy, which is about $4 trillion, roughly about a fifth of the US GDP, to bend the cost curve. There was the United States has the most expensive healthcare system in the world on a per capita cost basis. And it is twice as expensive as the second most expensive. So that tells you a lot. Mm-hmm. And there was increasing concern about what that was doing to corporate profits, what that was doing to individuals, the cost of healthcare, the affordability of care. And there was a great there was a great need to really use technology, among other things, to improve the experience for consumers and caregivers alike, to improve the outcomes, which in case your listeners were not aware, the United States is not only the highest cost, but it's also, it also distinguishes itself by not being the number one in terms of the quality of the outcome. So you have high cost, not so great quality of outcome. So all of that was a perfect storm for undergoing a complete transformation. And of course, it wasn't going to happen in a day or two. My view is it's going to be an intergenerational transformation process. But I saw it as an opportunity to be a part of it and make a small difference to it. As they say, make a tiny dent in the universe. That's kind of how I ended up here.
And you're doing just that, probably more so, because that path led you to Damo Consulting. But can you tell me a little bit more about the kind of markets that you're serving right here in 2022?
We're working mostly with large healthcare organizations and helping them with their technology strategy and their technology roadmaps and how to use technology to transform the healthcare experience, to improve organizational efficiencies, and to improve the quality of outcomes in healthcare. And we are right in the middle of that. We're advising our clients on their tech strategy, their data and analytics strategy, their patient and consumer engagement strategies, all kinds of things.
And although there's thousands of miles between us today, we've got so much in common because, of course, the global pandemic transformed how we work and indeed healthcare massively. They're the two big topics right now. But I'm curious, as somebody right in the heart of all this, in the eye of the storm, what are the top digital priorities for healthcare systems today?
It's interesting. When the pandemic struck in early 2020, the immediate priority for healthcare was how to continue to serve patients. And because patients couldn't come into the clinics and the hospitals, you had to adopt a virtual modality of some kind. And that really was the forcing function, the impetus, if you will, for the growth of telehealth, what we commonly refer to as telehealth, which is a broad term that covers virtual real-time video visits with your doctors, with online self-service tools to engage with your caregivers, with remote care models and a variety of other things. Fast forward 2 years, telehealth adoption has gone mainstream, and many in the United States who had not experienced a televisit experienced it for the first time in the last year or so, and they're not going back. They're going to stay with the experience. So we have reached a tipping point as it relates to the mainstreaming of telehealth modalities. But another interesting forcing function has arrived, and that is the acute shortage of workers in healthcare. As you probably know, Neil, across the globe, and certainly in the United States, there is a shortage of workers. And in the United States, go to any supermarket, go to a restaurant, the shortage of workers is very, very visible. They're just short-staffed. And in healthcare, I was reading a report recently which said the number one concern for CEOs, healthcare CEOs, is a shortage of healthcare workers. And I read another report which talked specifically about frontline workers. These are your nurse assistants, your home health aid assistants, and a variety of similar roles, which employ something like 10 million people in the United States. And in the coming 5 years, a lot of them are choosing to leave the workforce and are not going to be replaced fully. So in the next 5 years or so, we're going to see about 6 million people or so in that category of workers that are going to leave the workforce permanently, and only about 2 million are going to be replaced backfully. So what that means for us is that we are now at a point where we have to adopt technologies to automate a lot of the tasks that are being performed by humans so that we can still continue to provide the care to the patients and the consumers that we need to help. And now, can all of these jobs be replaced by automation? No. But there's a lot of technology out there that can eliminate some amount of workload, whether it is by replacing human workers with digital workers, partly or fully, or whether it is simply helping caregivers, clinicians become more productive through the use of technologies. And that, I think, is the next big thing that is upon us right now, and that is where we are spending a lot of our time.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of those exact same problems over here in the UK too. And I'm curious, as those digital priorities continue to evolve, how are they driving digital transformation in healthcare? And what are the digital transformation trends that you're seeing driving healthcare right now?
Right now, what we're seeing is, firstly, a huge increase in the number of innovative startups and digital health solutions, all aimed at improving the healthcare experience for patients and to improve the experience for caregivers, bring about efficiencies, and help the healthcare sector transition towards more of a digital or a virtual care model. The flip side of that development is that a lot of technologies have been put in place, but those technologies don't necessarily come together to deliver a seamless experience for the users of the tools, be it end consumers or be it caregivers. And historically, healthcare in the United States has been very fragmented. Patient data resides in proprietary systems across hospitals and across different technology vendors. And the new and emerging solutions need access to the data to be able to design experiences that are built on seamless data flow, but also seamless interfaces from a technology standpoint. And because we're not where we need to be, because we put the technologies in, but we haven't really optimized the use of the technologies to deliver superior experiences compared to, say, e-commerce or retailing or consumer banking or any of those sectors, there is a big focus right now among healthcare organizations to improve that experience. And so that is where I think where the immediate priorities lie. How do we get more out of the technology investments? How do we create a better experience for patients and caregivers? How do we increase adoption rates? Because at the end of the day, if you don't increase adoption rates, you're putting in a lot of the technologies and you're spending a lot of money on the technologies, but you're not getting enough out of it. So those are the priorities from our perspective, from a digital transformation perspective, that are on healthcare executives' minds. There's a lot of new technology coming up as well. So there's going to be more innovative uses of newer technologies. And we can talk about what those technologies are, but those are some of the big challenges and priorities in the short term.
And of course, if we talk about digital transformation, it's something affecting every industry, not just healthcare. And I think there has been a big realization over the last 2 years that it is a continuous journey, not a destination. A lot of people before were just thinking, oh, yeah, we've ticked the digital transformation box, let's move on. But it is a continuous journey. So for anybody listening in industries, any industry really, what advice would you offer on how to develop an enterprise digital roadmap? Because that's where they need to be, isn't it?
That is true. And, it is extremely important to have a roadmap so that you can visualize it. You can determine what your priorities need to be and go about securing your budgetary support or organizational support to implement those priorities. And so every journey starts with that roadmap. And digital transformation in healthcare needs to start with a roadmap, and health systems need to invest the time and effort up front to create some kind of a blueprint or a roadmap that guides the transformation journey for the coming years. In my firm, we've developed a digital maturity model, which is a 4-stage maturity model, which comes with an assessment tool and a framework that many health systems have taken advantage of. And essentially, it takes the results of the assessment and turns it into a numerical score, but importantly, analyzes it for benchmarks with peer organizations. So if you're a large hospital in a big metro area and you're in a competitive landscape with other hospitals and health systems also transforming digitally, What you want to know is how do you stand in your marketplace relative to your peers, but also importantly, how do you use that information to generate insights about what is important for your own patient population so that you can prioritize the investments and make the necessary investments, because you can't do it all in one go.
Yeah.
It's going to be done in phases, but the trick is to know what comes first, what comes later, and what's involved in it's not just about buying a piece of technology and hoping that it will solve the problem. You have to be internally ready for the transformation, which means the organizational commitment at the highest levels of the organization, very often at the board level, the organizational resources to support a large-scale multi-year transformation, plus, of course, the budgetary support, and picking the right partners, because you're not going to be able to do it yourself. So you need the right technology partners. How do you select your partners? How do you get into these strategic partnerships and relationships that are going to drive you forward? So these are all elements of developing a digital roadmap. And we advise our clients to invest in developing that roadmap upfront and then keep revisiting it on a regular basis as you roll out the program.
And I suspect if we have any healthcare enterprises listening anywhere in the world, they will all have a very, very similar list of priorities right now. And so how can those healthcare enterprises better approach digital transformation priorities here in 2022 and beyond? Is there any advice you would offer around that?
Well, it all starts with who you're serving. And that means that while the digital priorities may look very similar on the surface, there will be nuances and differences based on what kind of patient populations you're serving. Are you serving a rural population versus an urban population? Are you serving a low-income population versus an affluent population? And these are just, are you serving an older population versus younger population? These are all the dimensions that tell you where you need to be spending your dollars. So if you're serving a low-income population in an inner city, what you need to be thinking about is whether that population has access to all the enablers of digital health if you want to deliver digital health to them. As an example, do they have access to high-speed bandwidth? If you're going to develop all these applications that are going to run on smartphones and you want them to have the smartphones, you want them to have bandwidth. This has been identified. I mentioned this because this has been identified as one of the big dependencies which can, determine whether a program is successful or not. And so all of these underlying elements need to be considered. But at the end of the day, it goes back to who are you serving and what are their needs? Do your patients really want you to engage with them through real-time video consults, or are they happy with phone calls or even texting? And you need to understand that before you invest in programs that even within a big city, you can have big differences in the populations that are being served depending upon where exactly you're located. And so that becomes important.
And then if we look at the next stage beyond that, what do you think the secret is to reaching that utopia of digital maturity in healthcare? It does exist, but what is the secret to getting there?
In our maturity model, we have, like I said, it's a 4-stage model. Yeah. Organizations at model 4 are the ones that we consider to be the most mature relative to others within the sector. Now, what's most mature in healthcare relatively may not seem as mature when you're looking at it from the point of view of a banking sector or an e-commerce sector or a hospitality sector. But within healthcare, the most mature organizations are the ones who tend to take a holistic view of transformation, which means transforming not only the technology-enabled experiences at the front end, but transforming your entire organizational processes and workflows, and transforming the back-end IT infrastructure to support these experiences and to be able to bring it all together in one comprehensive strategy and roadmap, which really drives the organization forward as a whole. And a lot of this has to do with culture, with mindset, with internal organizational structures, the processes and workflows, and a variety of other things. And very often, the technology may seem like a relatively small part of it at the end of the day.
And over the last 2 years, there has been a lot of excitement around new technologies. For me, what excites me is what happens when these new technologies begin to converge and completely change things. But what excites you about the role that emerging technologies will play in the healthcare industry?
I get excited by a lot of emerging technologies and their potential for transforming healthcare as we know it. And we've all, the big among the big buzzwords. There's nothing bigger than AI, and AI, unfortunately, has become a much maligned term in some ways because everybody uses it so loosely and so, all-encompassingly that it's almost lost meaning. But if you peel it all back, there is great potential for AI to really use data to drive insights that can intervene to save lives or intervene to improve the living conditions and the health conditions of people living with chronic diseases. And there are a number of other things, R&D and finding new drugs, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the other technologies that I get excited about in the immediate context, I like voice recognition, which I think has the potential to eliminate workloads on physicians. And physicians have been overburdened with work, and they have been for a while, but the pandemic really put it over the top. So I like voice technologies and where they can go. The technology itself isn't as mature as we want it to be, but big tech firms are making big bets on voice, and hopefully the technology will mature to a point where it becomes seamless, just like you and I would talk to our smartphones to get directions to go from one place to another. The others that I like, automation technologies, I think can, take care of a lot of routine, repetitive tasks. So I think there is some excitement there. I like to look at some of the more, more recent technologies and where they could take us. AR, VR is one. It's still at the fringes, and now Web3, the metaverse. What could potentially come out of that? Could we be in the future be doing a virtual visit in the metaverse? Again, big questions, but with these technologies, you never know. Sometimes, they are in the fringes for a long time, and all of a sudden, something puts it over the top. Just like we saw with telehealth. We saw telehealth was less than 5%, less than 10%, less than 5% of total visits prior to the pandemic. And then the pandemic comes along and you see an order of magnitude of 30 to 40x increase in the number of televisits. So a forcing function like an external shock or an impetus can change all of this. Or sometimes it's just, market forces, and suddenly, like electric cars. There was a big constraint on electric cars because the charging stations infrastructure wasn't there, and then all of a sudden that doesn't seem to be a limiting factor anymore, and you see electric cars everywhere. So I get excited by a lot of these technologies, but I'm also a pragmatist. I like to see what's making a real difference here and now to patients and caregivers and go from there.
Love that. And we began the podcast talking about your origin story today. We've almost come full circle now. And I always like to ask my guests if there's a song, piece of music, movie, or a book that has inspired or helped them in their career. So we can pass it on to the listeners and maybe leave them on an inspirational note. So do you have a choice and a story you can leave us with today?
Well, I must start by saying that I'm a musician. So music has been the backdrop to my life, all my life. And I'm a guitar player and a singer. I'm in 2 bands. I live in Chicago. I'm very deeply into the Chicago blues style as well. But I will tell you this, if there is, I wouldn't, trying to pick one song is impossible. But I will say that the most lasting influence on my life from a music standpoint has been the music of the Beatles. And, it's my go-to place at the end of the day. And I just happened to recently watch the Get Back session, which is a 9-hour documentary. Don't ask me how I found the time for it, but I did. And again, it took me back to some very, very happy times in my earlier years. So yeah, the music of the Beatles. And pick any song; it doesn't matter. They're all great. I love the simplicity, the clarity of the lyrics and the delivery, just the sheer melody and the way John and Paul could bring the songs to a close. That's from a music standpoint.
That is so spooky that you said that, because I finished watching it today and it's took me about 6 weeks to get through 9 hours. And it's typically been while I've been editing podcasts and I've had it on in the background, etc. And I finished it this afternoon. So for you to say that now is quite serendipitous there. But yeah, so I've had those songs from the Let It Be album playing on repeat in my head, Get Back, etc. So yeah, I will think of one and add it off there. So I think that's what I'll do. But for anyone listening wanting to find out more information about you, your work and the kind of thing that you're doing, or even check out one of your bands in Chicago, what's the best starting point?
Well, you can find me on YouTube. Find me, and I have a YouTube channel for the music, so you can always go look it up. And my schedule, and the performing has slowed down a little bit because of the pandemic and everything. But you can see a lot of my videos, my performance videos. About my work, you can go to thebigunlock.com, which is the same site as my podcast. You could go to my company site, democonsulting.net. And at the risk of sounding faintly pompous, just Google me.
I love that. And I've got to ask, you mentioned podcasts there. What's your podcast about?
The podcast is called The Big Unlock. It's the same as the title of my first book. Yeah. And it's about digital transformation. So I have this incredible opportunity to talk to the leading practitioners of digital health and digital transformation. So these are startup founders, technology executives, healthcare executives, anyone who is right now in the middle of a digital transformation journey. They come in and talk about their experiences, talk about best practices, and share their knowledge. And really, it's a platform where I've gained so much just by talking to them. And I hope that my listeners take something away from each of those episodes that helps them do their jobs just a little bit better. So yeah, we're in season 4, thebigunlock.com, and you'll find us there. Excellent. But thank you for asking, Neil.
No problem. I will add links to everything that you just mentioned on the blog post that we'll use to promote this episode. I love chatting with you about the top digital priorities for health systems today, how to develop enterprise digital roadmaps, how to reach digital maturity in healthcare, exploring all those trends. And more than anything, for sharing your very personal story. I've learned a lot about you today and also your work as a musician as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to share all that with me today.
Thank you, Neil. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
As you all know, I love talking about the technical aspects and how technology is changing the world and how it can solve real problems in business. But it's also the human touch. That's one of the things that I love about doing this. And having had our conversation today, digging deep into digital transformation in healthcare, etc., it's all incredibly cool. But I also love just getting to know Paddy a little bit better there, hearing about his story, how he went on his own, and how he likes to rock out in his own band, his own blues band in Chicago there. And yes, he's been added to my list of people I want to share a beer with. So I want to see him perform on stage. And it's just lovely to hear his story unfold in a way like that. So thank you so much, Paddy, for coming on the podcast and sharing that story. And for anyone listening, wherever you are in the world, I'd love to hear your story, and hopefully I can meet you on one of my future travels. Like I say, my next one is in Utah, so if you do listen in that area, give me a shout and I'll pop by and say hello. But as always, remember you can get me on techblogwriter@outlook.com if you want to email me, or you can get me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram @Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. So a big thank you to Paddy for coming on today, and an even bigger thank you to each and every one of you for tuning into this podcast every day, and especially the new, and also a big hello to the new listeners as well. We've had quite a few hop on board lately from all over the world. So hit me up, ask me a question, pitch to come on the show, whatever it is, and I'll return again tomorrow. So thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.